Okay, it's September 4th, 2019. Uh, the piece that I started in the last tape that I cut off, because those were the introductory comments, really, the transforming game, it continues now. This is the transforming game continued. And the transformation that I was talking about is that to show the transformation in this work, there are a couple of pieces in this stretch of manuscript that focus on stand-up comedy. And interestingly, they were written before a piece that I wrote on January 4th, 2017. So these were at least between a year and 2 years before this piece was written. The January 4th, 2017 piece is called Stand Up Comedy is Dead. So, and I actually have a video of this piece, but I'm going to put it in here again as part of the this ethical presence manuscript rewrite, re-improvised, videoized project that I'm working on now because it belongs here. It belongs in this spot. So I want to go through stand-up comedy is dead, and then when I look at the other pieces about stand-up that I have within within this stretch of material, I can refer to it within the context of stand-up comedy is dead. Okay. This is the whole transformative idea. Refer to the previous tape, class. The previous tape is not necessarily a prerequisite for this one, but it will add to your pleasure. Not your pleasure, to your understanding. All right. I always get in trouble when I try to be funny or cute in that way. Anyway. All right. Stand-up comedy is dead. Dave Chappelle, this was January 4th, 2017, right? Okay. Dave Chappelle is being criticized for a recent comedy performance. People feel they are disrespected by what he said. For purposes of this piece, the nature of their grievances hardly matter. The problem is not only in the alleged grievances against the performer, it lies in the form itself. I know of two changes in the nature of post-World War II stand-up comedy in the US, and now we are on the cusp of a third. I am sure there are more changes, and I could write about them, I suppose, but I will just discuss what is relevant to the piece that I'm writing here. The starting point: seltzer bottles and mugging. Immediately after World War II, comedians were just silly, broad slapstick antics, shrill voices, lots of making faces. Milton Berle was initially the most prominent. Jerry Lewis was probably the last of this breed, the last really successful one of this breed. In all this discussion, I will use big stars as a means of illustration. The scores of other performers in each era work primarily in the same way. Also, I won't discuss people who work in a manner before their time, so no digressions about Lord Buckley and the like. My purpose is to make a cultural observation here, not to critique individual comedians. Inflection point one: the emergence of sophistication. A new kind of comedian emerged in the mid-1950s. The Compass Players and early Second City were a large part of this development. Compass and Second City were not stand-up operations, but they spawned some revolutionary stand-ups. Comedy became intelligent and satiric. Bob Newhart, Shelley Berman, Nichols and May, Woody Allen, Jonathan Winters, Robert Klein, David Steinberg were comedians who were very smart about cultural and political matters and human psychology. They made sharp observations, but were not agents of social change. They made ironic comments about what most in their audience agreed was an imperfect but pretty good world, all in all. Of course, prophets also worked in this time, like Lenny Bruce and Dick Gregory. But those comics were also before their time. Inflection point 2, the time of paradox. When I say before their time, by the way, obviously Lenny Bruce and Dick Gregory were prominent at that time, but they were before their time in terms of their influence wasn't extending to all the other comedians. Their influence was very strong in later comedians, but there weren't a lot of Lenny Bruces running around in 1964. Okay. Inflection point 2, the time of paradox, comedians as rock stars and as leaders of social change. The incredible success of Saturday Night Live was an earthquake in comedy. Again, not stand-up, but influential on stand-up. John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd filmed the Blues Brothers movie in Chicago when I was on the main stage at Second City. They came and hung out around the theater for a brief time during the shooting of that show and soon opened a private club of their own across the street. They were as popular as the Beatles. It's not an exaggeration. And something was lost in this transition. Comedians in any era were always about being lovable losers who struggled. Comedy, Charlie Chaplin in 1940's Bob Hope, was a representation of humanity as a giant collective fool who, by dint of love or resourcefulness or some other positive human characteristic, prevailed in spite of all its, well, human faults and failures. That changed with SNL. Comedians now were people of power. They were rich and they had a voice. SNL stars largely used that power to be rich, famous, popular. SNL was all about success. Yes, SNL stars weren't stand-ups, but they had a great influence in how the audience perceived stand-ups. Steve Martin's mega popularity in the mid-1970s was the stand-up equivalent to SNL, a stand-up who filled basketball arenas. And of course, Steve Martin has been, for decades, a very big presence on SNL. The more interesting development at this cultural moment came out of what two stand-ups did with their fame and power. Richard Pryor and George Carlin used stand-up as a means to be artists and to assert cultural, political, and moral leadership through their comedy, which was unfailingly hilarious. This tone in comedy marked the high water mark of stand-up as an art form. And then the next period was the age of repetition. And then comedy stayed the same for years. And this isn't unusual in any way. Stand-up trends were like trends in popular music. A great revolutionary sound emerges. This is the parallel to popular music. A great revolutionary sound emerges, like Sinatra or Elvis or the Beatles. And then we listen to it for many artists for a few generations, the same type of music until something new happens. Some superficial formal changes happen, but nothing essentially transforms. And of course, this is in the section about transformation, right? So there's been no transformation in improvisation either as a performance form. This is a little bit of a digression, but since it is in the section, I'm putting it in the section on improvisation in the manuscript, so it fits in here. And also, obviously, there is a cross influence between improv and stand-up. The biggest changes in improv has come in its applications, mainly in the field of education, and in its popularity, particularly as a participatory activity. People seem more interested in improvising themselves than in watching it. New formal changes occur in improv, as in music, herald, long form, blah, blah, blah. Each generation thinks they've done something different and chauvinistically think that they do it better, when really no one has ever fundamentally changed or improved upon what Paul Sills and David Shepard were up to at the compass in the 1950s. I can't help but digress here. Well, this whole thing's a digression anyway. Improvisers should pick up their game in this regard. Viola Spolin said that the soul of improvisation is revolution and transformation. She said improvisation should turn into something new. It certainly has for individuals who will become writers, actors, directors, CEOs now. They're using it in that training too, after a good training in improvisation. But the form itself can be much more. Improvisers either revere the past in an unhealthy way, of course, the founder should be honored, or they compete with the past and claim superiority to it when their actual work demonstrates very little that supports the claim. So, in the age of repetition, we have big stand up stars today, like Stephen Colbert, for example. He does monologues if you're balking at that classification. He's a stand up. So, you have big stand up stars like Colbert that have a social consciousness. But like Xerox copies, all repetitions are a bit faded. Colbert is famous, but not like the Beatles or the Blues Brothers were. Colbert has power, but not like Pryor or Carlin. Colbert's a media voice. Pryor and Carlin were social voices. Colbert has a corporate job, so his voice is not totally unfettered. He doesn't exert the leadership of Pryor or Carlin either. He's limited to having some of his sharply pointed jokes, real social comments, presented as a sideshow on the news. He's not dangerous like Pryor or Carlin. People actually changed after listening to those guys. Again, change, transform. None of this is Colbert's fault. He's doing what he can with the cultural moment and, frankly, with his job. It's a job. He has a job, or at least this commercial moment. Which brings us back to Dave Chappelle. Stand-up comedy is dead. Chappelle missed with his recent comments because he is fiercely holding on to a form which is no longer viable. He wants to communicate only through the joke. It's what he identifies with. And I'll say, I noticed that he has a supporting role in the recent remake of A Star Is Born, whatever, and that shows some impulse to broaden what he's doing. But when he's in that stand-up format, he'll get philosophical, but he has to go to the joke. And the joke a lot of times doesn't have the complexity in form to handle things that are happening currently. Now, the joke is a literary form that's born of oppression. Good jokes make fun of the powerful. Bad jokes mock the weak. The joke has always been an instrument of near justice. The joke has always been a way of dealing with injustice, not the answer to it. Pryor and Carlin awakened outrage, and that was a huge change. Outrage is necessary for personal and social change as a first step. But we are now past the time of prophecy. The collective soul is screaming for justice. People don't want to just mitigate their suffering. They want to end it. And the times are complex. We all have some oppressed and some oppressor within us at the moment. We allowed our politics and culture to get to this promising moment of crisis. The joke can be a part of a presentation to an audience, but it doesn't work as the whole thing. The consciousness of the world has made a big leap in the past couple of years, and stand-up comedy is a casualty of that leap. Things have to be destroyed in order to create the new. I had a 19-year-old kid work as my stage manager on the last iteration of my show. I don't think I'll ever call it anything I do a show again, which was titled The Death of a Nation. Even he would admit he has a lot to learn about stage managing, and maybe he won't pursue it. He's a good young composer and musician. But he brought a wonderful spirit to the show. And he gave me one of the most instructive comments that I've ever heard about my work. I love how the show can be very funny and then become very serious and intense. I love how the show can be very political and then get very personal. You tell jokes, you make poetry, you analyze things, you teach and tell a lot of stories. There are all sorts of characters. It's moving and thought provoking. It works on so many levels. That 19-year-old is the voice of the future. I had a director for that show. We mutually decided not to continue to work together. I had a line in here, a very nice guy. To tell you the truth, I don't have anything against the guy, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a very nice guy. He kind of was pretentious. He was too controlling. He really did something that pissed me off in this final performance, which was in this like dingy little room that I rented and was with an invited audience. And he kept pushing me to. He said, "Oh, you should just go to stand up places and everything." I didn't want to do it, and he kept pushing me to do it. But what he did the last night, it's like before I went on because he was directing it from Los Angeles. So before I went on, he was condescending to me, like at one point we're having a conversation before the show, and I said something like, "Well, I said, this investigation, it could lead to Trump being it could lead to not that he would be indicted, but that he should be indicted for treason." And he said, "For treason, it didn't turn out to be an unreasonable thing to say, and it wasn't an unreasonable thing to say then." But then what he did was, in his direction, he didn't have the lights go down. He just had me stumble and go out. He didn't want to give me that respect. He said, "Oh, you go to your party or whatever." He was superficial and stupid in that regard, actually. So I'm writing this about a month later. That show was December of did I say this is 2018? I must have put the wrong date on this thing. Yeah, it was January 4th, 2018 that I wrote this, not 2017. Because it was December 1st, 2017 that I did that show. So anyway, this was the part of me that wasn't completely outside. When I say everything is autobiographical, of course this is autobiographical. These insights that I'm having on stand up comedy in general is what I was getting out of is what I got out of doing that show. I think it was after that show where I just said, if something's humorous or whatever, it's humor. But actually, I did do it in that show. Like I had these improvised wraparounds where I introduced humor into what I was doing, and it was a vestigial tale. Look, here's the thing about stand-up comedy. It's maybe you could say maybe this is a transformation about all genres, really. Um, why straitjacket yourself with the genre? It's like let the substance of what you're saying determine how you say it. So stand-up comedy is dead because stand-up comedy necessarily limits you. Dave Chappelle, whatever he said offended people because it was considered politically incorrect. And the reason it offended people was because he didn't have the whole story. It was a complex story that needed more perspectives to be introduced to it, and it couldn't be dismissed with just a joke or a laugh. Trump does stand up comedy. Said Trump gets up there, little Marco and low energy Jeb and all this stuff. He tells jokes, and I always thought with I always had a rule with my humor when I was doing comedy that you make fun of the powerful. You don't make fun of the weak. But, who do you see as powerful? So if Rush Limbaugh talks about feminazis because he's saying that a bunch of liberal academic women are destroying our culture or whatever, he's going to make the claim. He's going to make that claim. It's harder than that. At the beginning of this thing, I stumbled over it because I had high spirits this morning, so I was being a little glib at the beginning, and then I saw that I was painting myself into a corner, and that's why I'm glad that I did it. I didn't know I was doing it for that reason at the time, but it's illustrative of what I'm saying here. So this director, I'm not going to call him a nice guy. I don't have anything against him, like I say, but nice guy. The guy shits on me. Why should I call him a nice guy? This is something that's taken me a long time to learn about life and art. I can understand why he's. I have nothing against him because I'm not saying he's an evil person for shitting on me. I know, but I know it's his problem. Blah blah blah. I understand him. I don't care. He's not that interesting to me, really. But I'm not going to say he's a nice guy. So we mutually decided not to continue to work together. Actually, what he did was he kind of disappeared, and I accepted it. So there wasn't even the integrity of, but he couldn't, because for him to get into a conversation as to why we weren't going to work together would give me equality in the situation, and he doesn't know how to do that. He's got to be the director and sit back and vape, and that's what he would vape and wear a hat and not just look somebody in the eye. Okay, I'm immune to direction for my part. I can only do what feels true to me. So I listen to people, but ultimately I do what I want. And I'm sure this was very frustrating for my director. I say my director friend. He's not my friend. He's not my friend. So there's a transformation. He's not my enemy, but he's not my friend. That's something I want to really. I think it's starting to leave, but that's something that I would change from January 2018, from a year and a half ago. All right, from now on, I will direct myself. Look, how do you like this? How do you like this direction? How do you like my intricate camera work? There's a joke. That's okay. I don't think that harmed anything. There's a show too, but too much unnecessary arguing, and it's a story of my life. Being told to do something which goes against my deepest beliefs leads to legitimate rebellion. And when I am dead and put in the ground, no director will go in the hole with me. The director, to his credit, said as much when we started. But we tried, and I got a lot out of that. And I do stand by this. So I thank him for that. Because I remember a couple of rehearsals before he kind of, not inexplicably, either talked to somebody or he got kind of cold feet or whatever. But in one rehearsal, because we would do these rehearsals, it's kind of like this, I would have this material that I wrote and I'd talk through it and I'd improvise around it, and he'd be watching it like, online. It would be like this. And he would say, God, you work so hard at this. Said, and that stuff's really good. And you could tell that he was being moved on. But I think actually, as I talk this through, I'm having more compassion for him, because I think that my work threatened him, that if he would embrace it, he'd have to make some major changes. And maybe, not maybe, he wasn't ready to do that. Well, maybe, because I can't say that with certainty, right? He wasn't ready to do it. Okay, now we had a major creative difference. The director thinks stand up is still alive. Well, at the time, I wasn't conscious of the fact that I thought it was dead. He mentioned a stand up that he admired, Paul F. Tompkins, as someone who was very aware. As someone who was very aware of everything happening in the room when he works. I wasn't sure why he brought Tompkins up because I think that's a strength of mine as well. I mean, being present in that way. I had seen a little of Tompkins on TV, but really didn't know his work. So I looked him up on YouTube. I only lasted for about 3 minutes as I watched Tompkins. I thought his act was excrement. And I'm not criticizing well, I think if I say his act shit, I guess I am criticizing him. But anyway, I'm not criticizing Tompkins. I hated the show because stand up is dead. I would have hated his show if stand up were alive. Tompkins, and by the way, Tompkins wasn't present in the room. He had some arch, affected, calculated persona that was inauthentic. And his tone was defined by what he thought people would find funny. So his voice would go and that told you it was a joke. Tompkins started talking about a funeral that he attended in a very superficial way. He was trying to shock and trying to be glib. The only thing the writer performer standing on a stage in front of people should be going for is the exploration of the truth. Period. That's true. Just that's all. It's that simple. I wasn't offended by Tompkins. I just felt it was a waste of time. I had moments in my show as recently as July 2017 that resembled Tompkins' inauthentic manner. I had this idea that I would organize my show in 3 acts: stand up, analysis, story, and poetry. Oh yeah, that's what I was doing. That's what one of my shows were doing. But that didn't work either. So you see the whole thing about the transforming game, the transformation of this process. I did these shows, people came and saw shows. They would say that they thought the shows were good. They were friends of mine. Maybe they were just making me feel good or whatever. But the stand up, but this idea of breaking it into stand up, analysis, story, and poetry. Yeah, I remember when I did that now. That didn't work. A piece has its own creative logic. I started the Rick blog with the idea that I could unleash all the disparate parts of my personality on the world. And I keep getting better at doing that. I started doing these videos, recently, like a couple of weeks ago. And it was after this period where I was writing, it looked like poetry. It actually was spoken word. And I was writing these pieces, and some of the best writing that I ever did was in the space of time, like between April and early August of 2019. Some really good pieces, and I wrote these pieces, and then a friend of mine suggested to me to do the videos, so I did videos of these pieces, and I considered that a project. Because there were several of them, and they were quite good, and they're on the blog. And I'm not saying I'm not going to go back to that type of writing and those type videos, because I am. But then I just stumbled into this thing of going through this manuscript, and now to take these formerly written pieces and then improvise around them and talk and everything is something that I'm doing right now, and finding satisfying. So I'm doing that. And I think it's so there's never a fixed point. It's a transforming game. That I like doing those very, very contained spoken word pieces, kind of polished, concise. I'm sure in a lot of quarters would be praised a lot more than what I'm doing right now. but I like what I'm doing right now. And I see the artistic value in it. So I'm going to keep doing it for a while until it changes into something else. The transforming game. I'll go back to the text here. Genre is a trap. My friend, he's not my friend. The director, who was very generous with his time through most of the experience. This thing about being generous with his time. We were working on something together. What do I mean he was generous with his time? This shows a problem. This is one reason why I have this whole constellation of feeling about being bullied, and this is what invites it. I mean, people see this as a weakness. So, and it is, because I've had to struggle, and I'm not alone. One thing I think I'm talking about, this happened to me, that happened to me. I think these things are universals. I mean, the idea of equality. One of the things I hate the most in life is being condescended to. And then I always end up fighting back, and it never remains that way. And it happened that way in this situation too. But after the experience, I'm still saying he was generous with his time. And he understandably lost interest at the end of our common project, and that's more than okay. Bullshit. It wasn't okay. He didn't work as hard on it as I did. He bailed out. He got scared of it. He was making all these he was Paul F. Tompkins and telling me to go to these comedy clubs. And really, I'm glad I'm going over this again, because this is bullshit. Generous with his time. Yeah, fuck that. No. It was good to oppose his ideas. No, I'm sick of opposing ideas. I'm sick of it. And I really am. I want collaboration and support. I don't want so that's another transformation. I mean, I don't care about his ideas. I care about my ideas. One thing I tried to do, back to the text, one thing I tried to do was go to storytelling and stand-up venues in order to polish segments of the show. The director encouraged me to continue to do so, and that direction received an emphatic no. He accused me of repeating myself in the negative, but in my defense, he kept bringing it up. So he said, you say no all the time and you repeat all the time. He kept bringing it up. Go do a set at a comedy club. Go do a set at a comedy club. I don't want to go do a set at a comedy club. But I didn't say it like that. I just kept saying no. And he says that's repetitious. What he's saying is that if I'm the director, you should do what I say, because I know more about this than you do. And newsflash, you don't. Okay. I really dislike those stand-up storytelling type shows. I would never go listen to them as an audience. And in playing them, I felt like a jazz musician appearing with the Archies. That's a reference for those of you who are 90 years old. I went to one show and people balked at the fact that there were moments of anger in my set. I was told to be more like a woman who told a story about fucking a rock star at a concert when she was young. I went to one show that demanded strict time limits. Time limits are a good exercise, but I'm beyond that. A piece should be concise, I guess, but its length should really be determined by its content or what it's trying to achieve. I always felt off at these shows because of their superficiality. Most of the acts were pretty dumb. And you might think that I didn't get laughs at these venues, given, and here's another thing where I keep not giving myself credit. You might think that I didn't get laughs at these venues given the bitterness of my observations. They're not bitter observations. They're objective observations. You know, I thought of this piece, even when I did it recently, I said, oh, well, you know, this is really a good piece. And this is one of the better things that I wrote. And it came out of this experience that I had with this December 1st, 2017 show. I said, oh, well, you know, this has depth to it. It's a good piece, but it's not accurate. And it's not confident enough. There's again the bitterness of my observations. I'm not bitter. I'm not jealous. Or the woman who told the story about fucking a rock star, a one night stand that she had with a rock star. It's not like there were other dimensions to that story or there was any poetry to it or that's a place that I'd like to be. This Paul F. Tompkins who's making these unfunny jokes about being at a funeral that says nothing about reverence for life and death or you know that the humor isn't tied up into something deeper like Richard Pryor would do or whatever. I'm supposed to say that's good. This stuff is shit. And when you're doing it on the level of, you know, I'm not a prominent person, so it's not like somebody's going to pay me $10,000 a weekend to play Mr. Kelly's, or it's like, you know, you go to these places and whatever. What do you think you're surrounded? You're surrounded by shit. You know, it's just a big jerk off these places. But anyway. When I went to these places, I killed, actually. I got big laughs. I was a popular act. Even at a place where they had issues with my moments of anger, the audience loved me. I've always been much more popular with audiences than with whoever runs the show, the producer, MC, or whatever. They always have a problem because I'm a disruptor. But the audiences are always like what I'm doing. You know, only once in a while, it's like my friend Jeff Michalski invited me to do 5 minutes at Bughouse Square, which I talked about on the last. I've done it for a couple of years there, and this year I didn't do. It wasn't a comedy routine or whatever, but it was people really liked what I did. And Jeff really liked what I did, and he and his wife Jane, and this was in the developmental phase. I did it at the Fanatic Salon, which is their theater out in Los Angeles, and they very supportive and like what I did or whatever. But they're the only people that I could think of within that whole comedy improv type place that are open and accepting of it. I mean, Andrew Alexander at Second City was tremendously kind and put me in there rent free for a few months doing a show. But you know, he wasn't around. It's like, it's not like, you know, obviously he doesn't administer the thing, but he just took me up in there. That was really nice, and I did that developmentally. But no one really came, and that was that, you know. But that was quite nice. But really, within the otherwise within IO, oof, terrible, terrible, really disrespectful. And I wouldn't want to work there anyway because I've never seen anything there that I think's any good. Really, never, not once. And I've done some stuff there, and I don't like working there. I don't like the atmosphere there. You know, one of the things is that it's kind of a petty and competitive place, and any place that's really about improvisation is not about competition. There's no The whole idea of it is that well, not the whole idea, but the idea of it is that Viola Spolin set up this system where the children could play without competing with one another. That the whole thing is about respect for one another and cooperation and diversity and uh, and that's what it's about. And then the rude, disrespectful, stupid, superficial, really bad. Not a fan. But yeah, but anyway, going into any of these other places, including IO, a friend of mine had me do like a bit of stand up in a show that he was doing, and that was well received. But I was always great at doing their shows, but I wasn't doing my work. So I learned I need spaces where I can work autonomously and speak my truth without the interference of other people's rules and expectations. And you know what? With the advent of all this personal technology, uh, I can do it. I'm doing it here. So these videos really satisfy that. What was the? Oh yeah, there's a piece that I'm going to get to uh, in this section where I about Abel Ferrara, the independent film director. Welcome to New York. Uh, anyway, this movie that he had and problems that he had with interference with the producers with the final cut in the movie and everything else. And I never want to have that. See, I want to put my vision out into the world. So, and I'm doing it right now with this. I would do it on a broader platform, but I want creative control over what I'm doing. So that'll come up when we get into that Abel Ferrara piece. So here I'm writing in this piece. So I learned I need spaces where I can work autonomously. Well, here I am, and speak my truth without the interference of other people's rules and expectations. The included photo. So this was written on the blog, right, initially. So the included photo was taken at my last performance to date by the bad stage manager, who is also a wonderful oracle. It is a picture of the future. Stand-up comedy is dead. Long live beyond comedy. Copyright 2018, Richard Thomas. So yeah, so this was in 2018. So this is actually just the first part. I don't care if it takes 9 videos to get through the stretch of the manuscript. So far I've done over an hour and haven't got to the text and the actual text in the manuscript yet. So that's what I'll do on the next video. All right. See you soon.